right, everyone. Good day. I'm John Coleman from ApocatastasisInstitute for the Humanities, and this is, here we go. I need to turn down the relaxing music so you can hear me appropriately. This is our first week of the project. We are getting into our comprehensive study of all of human life. And this first trial run will take 1 year to complete. And we are using poetry and H.G. Wells's outline of history. Momentarily, I will have that file. We're going to read, nibble away a bit at H.G. Wells and his introduction. But you are able to download all the poetry and the weekly selections from our project sub-site down in the description. So you might want to do that. There are many birds I want to hit with this stone, this project, this unified curricula here at the college. And one of which is to make a singular course of study that's appropriate to our full-time students enrolled full-time, our monthly students, our, shall we say, occasional students, or those who drop in for the odd open event, and you, the general public. And this project has been inspired very much by texts such as the Breviary and the Book of Common Prayer. And while we're getting through this time around just the poetry and H.G. Wells, which has taken a huge amount of my effort to apportion day by day, week by week, I will also be, shall we say, backfilling this with a second and eventually a third round of readings. That is to say, when the project is altogether complete, one will have the ability to read 3 selections each day of the year focused on a singular theme, usually introduced by H.G. Wells's selection. So that's the project and the workload on my end. The workload for your end is to do the reading. And as I say, you can download all of this text freely from our project sub-site. We're setting out, last week we had a chit-chat about more pedagogical topics overall. And if I can reprise that before we get into a brief advertisement and our poetry for today, for this week, with a lot of things changing in society, AI is the thing that people bring up, but to a certain extent, it's really only the cherry on top. Almost everything, almost all of the cultural assumptions that undergirded liberal compulsory education are gone at this point. The only thing that is keeping formal education as popular as it is not a genuine popularity, as we use the term in a kind of vulgar sense. People liking it, lots of people liking it. Oh, it's popular. I'm using it in that kind of bastardized sense. What's keeping formal education popular is the very last and maybe the most morbid aspect of the middle class, and that is, what is everyone else doing? And when that domino falls, you will see formal enrollment in schools hollow out faster than you can imagine. Your head and mine will spin. As I say, the changes which will be brought about by AI, that's getting people's attention, but almost every other aspect of life, which led to the rise and then the popularization, the legalization, the institutionalization of formal knowledge from pre-K to graduate school, that has gone by the wayside for all sorts of reasons, which we ought to be able to palpitate in these presentations week by week. But nevertheless, that dog has run, and we're at another point in human history. It's just a matter for the institution to collapse. Well, it shouldn't collapse altogether. And that's, of course, one of the dangers with critique, educational critique, for instance, is to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And for as long as there's been formal education, there's been the formal critique of education. And long story short, we need to represent to a society why we as teachers exist, why schools exist, why it's intelligent to go to school. And it involves really starting at the beginning as we're setting out on our journey of human history. Also, we're basically back to square one. We have to represent as professionals why we exist in society as teachers. Why do we exist? Now, that's going to be made very difficult because a lot of us teachers have hoarded out our vocation. And, it was good while the sun shone, we made hay. It was great to belly up to bankers and to capitalism and to pitch formal learning, whether that's a high school degree or a college degree or even a master's degree, as a good economic choice. Well, guess what? Capitalism has moved on. It doesn't need degree holders. In fact, it's very soon not going to need people. And so, the sun no longer shines on that bastardization of education. And so we're back to, you can say slogans like the life of the mind and the adventure of learning, but that's basically all we have left. And that's all we need. That's all we need. All that remains is for us to appreciate why the life of the mind, why the adventure of learning, whatever you want, the classical touch, why these things are valuable. To a certain extent, they're experiential. It's very hard for me as something of a classicist to, tell you why, you would pour in, so many months or years of your life into studying ancient authors and languages. It's very hard for me to quantify that, but I better, as a teacher, do that very fast if I'm to be given a hearing by a general public, which, the typical capitalistic, materialistic reasons for formal education no longer obtain. So in this series, hopefully I will be able to do that. Why? Not just to focus on the classics, but, focus on systematic study. I'll just give you that little nubbin as we get into our advertisement here. But we have more information than at any time in human history at the fingertips of more people than could ever imagine it. And that's not even thinking about the internet. I'm just talking about easily accessible periodicals and radio and your public library. Add your gizmos and gadgets and my gizmos and gadgets and the access to the internet outside of public libraries and an internet which even some municipal corporations like the town I'm sitting on top of, give away freely. You can actually go to the center of town. They have free Wi-Fi. And you have and I access to literally an unbelievable, incalculable amount of data. That's really cool. That's amazing. I'm getting back into folk music and kind of building my collection of it after taking some time off to focus on other things. And I'm, once again, struck by the endless amount of music that's available, even on somewhat restrictive genres. And seeing AI come up with folk pieces, so-called folk pieces. To be a true folk song, you cannot know the author. I guess that works, actually. For much of the 20th century, the authors of these songs were, very well known and very well compensated. So they were not true folk songs. But actually, AI, it's not an author, technically. So I guess we've come full circle. In any case, we do have such a mountain of data. Why schools matter is formal learning can help us organize this data and think in a way that we simply cannot naturally arrive at. There's something tremendously artificial about a school. That's not bad. For much of the 1990s here in these United States, into the 2000s, in fact, some experimental reading methods were tried, and they were absolutely disastrous. In fact, one of the reasons that People are reading so little right now has to do partially with the poor way that these fads instilled reading. And one of the falsehoods that reading pedagogy went down and began to imbibe and believe is that reading is natural. Reading is as natural as breathing or talking, and that's not the case. Reading and writing are profoundly artificial skills that we have to learn how to do, and now we're reaping the whirlwind for that. And you have children in junior high and high school who cannot read even basic words, let alone complex ideas in a paragraph, let alone a book. I don't think people realize the crisis of reading that's happening. And that's not assisted whatsoever by these telephonic devices. Nevertheless, the point I'm trying to make, now we're going to get into our advertisement. The point I'm trying to make is that reading, writing, and study, systematic study and thinking in a systematic fashion are not natural to us. It has nothing to do with your intelligence or mine. The method of knowledge acquisition is not systematic for the individual unless they're trained in it. And so one of the reasons that we have schools such as Apocatastasis, and why we will be the only schools that will continue after the collapse, is because we offer this. And you can join us here in this project, in this systematic study, not for 1 year around, please God, but indefinitely. That's the whole genius of this project. You'll get a certain grasp of human life and letters if you stick with us for the next year. But if you stick with us for the next 20 years, 30 years, your appreciation of the human saga will be something altogether different. And you say, wow, that's going to get really tedious to read the same text every year. Well, you should read the breviary. You would read the book of Psalms every month, every week, if you read the old versions of the breviary. And there's always something new. And it is true, for instance, that H.G. Wells' outline of history is not scripture. It's certainly not even, a book without flaws. There's all sorts of flaws that exist in the outline of history, which is our main text, especially this year, going forward. And yet, not being scripture and not being perfect, there are many, I won't say infinite, but there are many alleyways that one's reading of the text on any given year allow them to go down. And I can guarantee you, should God give me the health and the energy, that should I be doing these weekly classes with you, 50 years hence, we'll be going over the same material superficially, and yet I will have a new presentation to give every single time because there are so many alleyways. All right, so let's get our screen share up here, and then we will have our advertisement, and that will be for today just a way that you can follow us on our various social medias. And so we have all sorts of outlets. In fact, I have to update this because we've lately expanded onto Blue Sky and nextdoor.com. And that's in addition to LinkedIn, Substack, Gab, Telegram, Facebook, BitChute, Rumble, YouTube, Facebook, Discord, Telegram, and probably Twitter before we're done. I will not be calling it by its more recent name. It is Twitter. It will stay Twitter. Thank you very much. We don't go for rebrands here at Apocatastasis. Of course, with social media on the back of the house, the difficulty is, finding time to keep up with all these. I'm in such a way that I kind of have it streamlined, but even still, it takes a good half hour to update the whole lot of them. When you include also, the interacting with the websites, just drop a link or whatever. But kind of interact with it. So you stay on the radar of the algorithm. Speaking of the advance of AI, a lot of the imagery on these sites I did about a year and a half ago with a website called Deep AI, and I'm impressed, even in a year and a half, how much it's improved. I can see, for instance, this gentleman has 2 left hands, quite literally, 2 left hands, and his fingers are pretty messed up. That would not be the case now. So it does improve. Anyway, our social media, would you follow us there and like and subscribe and all that jazz? Then you can enroll at Apocatastasis once you've done your social media due diligence. Okay, let me just check the tech. We're looking good. All right, and now we move into our poem, and that is Ode to a Grecian Urn. We're looking at art, Neanderthal art, cave art, more accurately today, and that whole aspect of human life. So I thought this piece was appropriate. It will not be the last time we're coming across Keats or this particular poem. Ode to a Grecian Urn. And long story short, the narrator is in a museum, perhaps, looking at an urn, a pot, and he's seeing the young figures of people, the javelin throwers and the discus throwers and all the Greek athletes in their black and orange silhouettes, a very kind of stereotypical Greek art. And he's meditating on the fact that they're never going to grow old. He's speaking to the subjects of the art, that they're never going to get old. So that's the Ode to the Grecian Urn. Thou still unravished bride of quietness, thou foster child of silence and slow time, sylvan historian who canst thus express a flowery tale more sweetly than our rhyme. What leaf-fringed legend haunts about thy shape, of deities or mortals, or of both? In Tempe or the dales of Arcade, what men or gods are these? What maidens loth? What mad pursuit? What struggle to escape? What pipes and timbrels? What pipes and timbrels? What wild ecstasy? Heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. Therefore, ye soft pipes, play on. Not to the sensual ear, but more endeared, pipe to the spirit ditties of no tone. Fair youth, beneath the trees thou canst not leave thy song, nor ever can those trees be bare. Bold lover, never, never canst thou kiss. Though winning near the goal, yet do not grieve. She cannot fade, though thou hast not thy bliss. Forever wilt thou love, and she be fair. Ah, happy, happy boughs that cannot shed your leaves, nor ever bid the spring adieu. And happy melodist, unwearied, forever piping songs forever new. More happy love, more happy, happy love. Forever warm and still to be enjoyed, forever panting and forever young. All breathing human passion far above, that leaves a heart high sorrowful and cloyed, a burning forehead and a parching tongue. Who are these coming to the sacrifice? To what green altar, O mysterious priest? Leadest thou that heifer lowing at the skies, and all her silken flanks with garlands drearest, or dressed? Garlands dressed. What little town by river or sea shore, or mountain built with peaceful citadel, is emptied of this folk, this pious morn? And little town, thy streets forevermore will silent be, and not a soul to tell why thou art desolate can e'er return. O Attic shape, fair attitude with breed of marble and men, and maidens overwrought with forest branches and the trodden weed, thou, silent form, dost tease us out of thought. As doth eternity cold pastoral, when old age shall this generation waste, thou shalt remain in midst of other woe than ours, a friend to man to whom thou mayest. Beauty is truth, truth beauty, that is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know. Thus is John Keats's Ode to a Grecian Urn. The idea that the artistic subject is frozen in time. The young people on the pot will not grow old. The whole world will die and be born again. And yet this scene on the side of the urn will still be as lovely and as lively as ever it was. Now there's kind of a flip side poem to this called, I think, Sunday Morning by Wallace Stevens, where there's a similar meditation, but he takes it in a different direction. We'll enjoy Wallace Stevens down the line. Okay, but we're looking at art, one of our opening images here, this cave art. For whatever, how many years? 15,000 years, 10,000 years, 5,000 years. These animals, in a sense, have been running across this cave wall. I suspect this is probably a modern imitation, but you get the point. We'll pretend it's as old as the Highlands, as old as Adam walking the Highlands. But the point is, the art captures energy, it captures the hunt long after the event is down. And of course, we do have authentic cave art, which portrays this famously in the south of France, for instance. So that's why I thought Keats's poem was particularly appropriate for today. Now, from time to time, I'm going to have to check the tech just to make sure it's still chugging along, and so it is. So now we get to our selection for today. Now, my comments on these broadcasts will actually cover the entire week. And so that's what I prepare for here. In class, if you choose to enroll full-time, or even on a monthly or bi-weekly basis, there's more attention given to parts of each week. Obviously, if you're full-time, we can even donate a whole session to a day's selection. So my sentiments in these public broadcasts, which are more of a general nature, are dealing with the whole week that we have before us. And again, we're not going to dare to get into every nook and cranny, but we are going to paint in some of that picture. And the genius of this project, and you can download all this text in the link below, the genius of the project is over 5 and 10 and 15 years, even long after you're stopped enrolling and, God forbid, stopped watching the weekly presentations, that going over and over and over the material will allow you to ruminate, literally to chew over, like the ruminant type of animal has several chambers to their stomach. They're going over and over and over the grass. Well, that's where we get the word rumination. And just as we know from the liturgy of the hours, you can have a contained text. The book of Psalms in that example is not a very long book at all. And yet it has so many applications, such a diverse book. It, in a sense, contains the entire Bible and therefore all of human experience. Yet it's a small text. It's a contained text. That's the genius of rumination. Your mind, yes, is in a sense contained and directed with the text, but it can also dig down very deeply in that. Now, H.G. Wells, who is a British author, has this quote which we set out with from Frederick Ratzel, who himself did a universal history. A philosophy of the history of the human race worthy of its name must begin with the heavens and descend to the earth, must be charged with the conviction that all existence is one, a single conception sustained from beginning to end upon one identical law. And so we try to see all of human life in time, which is history, in this single whole, and try to tease out in our time ahead the different laws which govern human life and human interaction on this earth. And all of this study is appropriate to a science we called not history, but rather historiography, which deals with the more philosophical ends and aspects of the historical study. And there's a large aspect to historiography which deals with the way history has been written over time as well. But we begin with this meta historical quote: "A philosophy of the history of the human race, to be worthy of its name, must begin with the heavens and descend to the earth." And we begin with an introduction from H.G. Wells, where he gets into different parts. And in fact, this week I'm featuring this introduction as our Substack post. I hope you're following us there over on Substack. There's unique output appropriate, as it has been for much of this year, to the project. And he begins here by saying what this project is and what this project is not. And when it comes to what this is not, is an amalgamation of national histories. Now, this book is published originally in 1920, right after the Great War, and it would go through any number of updates all the way, if memory serves, to the early 1970s. Something like 72 or 73 is the last edition of the Outline of History. Probably for a few reasons. Obviously, Wells was dead by then. His standard had been taken up by some of his associates who would continue to update the volume through the 60s and 70s. But also, to be a little bit blunt, the type of generation which had the intellect to appreciate something like the Outline and to expect its updating and to even understand and grasp a project like the Outline by the 1960s and 70s was getting rather long in the tooth itself, and the generations on their heels were not nearly as lettered, and therefore their ability to grasp this project, Wells's project in that staying, was less. And so, Wells's own circle was probably getting long in the tooth, but also the readership that would appreciate the Outline of History was casting this mortal coil by the mid to late 20th century. But the general public, he says in this introduction, might have a certain grasp of their national history, the history of France, the history of Italy, and would be inclined, without correction, to view something like the Outline of History as the conglomeration of just a bunch of national histories. And that's not what this is. He says universal history, the only possible answer, right? So he says, look, let me backtrack. If an Englishman, for example, has found the history of England quite enough for his powers of assimilation, then it seems hopeless to expect his sons and daughters to master universal history. If that is to consist of the history of England plus the history of France, that of Germany and of Russia, we read this last week, in fact, to which the only possible answer is that universal history is at once something more and something less than the aggregate of national histories to which we are accustomed. Right? Most of us, even now in the 21st century, are still learning our, history of America, history of Canada, history of Mexico, wherever we live, and that for most people will be enough, shall we say. And it's remarkable how out of date. I'm broadcasting this in the year of grace 20 and 25, how out of date history teaching is, that we have this very nationalistic teaching of history, and that's still de rigueur across the Western world. Much like a lot of the natural science is hopelessly out of date. It's interesting, in future volumes of this project from Apocatastasis, we're going to include essays critiquing H.G. Wells and critiquing the outline of history, particularly from Hilaire Belloc and G.K. Chesterton, and if there are others, I'm sure there were at the time, I mean to include these critics as well. And we speak of, information that's taught in schools as being extremely out of date. And what's interesting is if you read Chesterton's critique of H.G. Wells, Hilaire Belloc's, he makes a very extensive critique of Wells's presentation of natural selection, which would have been appropriate for someone of Wells's generation, to be quoting books from the 1860s and 1870s. But by the 1920s, that was completely out of date. And yet, I can tell you, I'm just focusing on the idea of Darwinian evolution. The natural science, which someone in the 1920s was complaining was out of date, is here in these United States exactly what's still being taught. And the same goes for pretty much every other subject. I don't think people who aren't into pedagogy, either professionally or in an amateur fashion. Amateur just means that you love it for amour, doesn't mean that you're sloppy. People who are not familiar with the idea of pedagogy and teaching philosophy, and a little bit more than the superficial understanding of schools and how schools are administered, would be shocked to know just how out of date most of the material is. And the same is true with the almost automatic teaching of national histories in schools, and that's not just public schools for that matter. Anyhow, this book seeks to justify that answer. What answer? The fact that universal history must be something, how does he phrase it? Something more and something less than the aggregate. It has been written primarily to show that history as one whole is amenable to a more broad and comprehensive handling than is the history of special nations and periods. A broader handling that will bring it within the normal limitations of time and energy set to the reading and education of an ordinary citizen. Right, we're getting into a lot of history ahead of us, thousands of years of it, and yet it is absolutely obtainable by someone of average intelligence like yourself and myself, who applies themselves. We're starting out, this is the first day here at Apocatastasis of the autumn semester, and all of us, whether you're formally enrolled in class or not, myself as soon as you, can benefit from reminding ourselves about discipline. And I always give the students this talk about this time of year about the nature of discipline and the nature of education. Education, whether it's historical or just the general quality of being educated, does not mean you and I know a lot of material. That does not make you educated. What gives us that quality is that we have a humility and a discipline when it comes to knowledge. We have a humility as to our ignorance and as to the superiority of the scholars we're applying ourselves to, including our dead scholars, our authors. We have that understanding of the power dynamic. We humble down. We realize the vast amount of ignorance that we have. That obtains for the educated soul. And then the second thing is discipline. Discipline is what makes you educated, not having native intelligence, not, again, knowing a lot. That does not make you educated. What will compensate for many, many defects, and this is true outside of education, what compensates in life is discipline, applying yourself, systematically cutting out distractions. That will compensate for your defects and my defects, intellectually and in many other ways. We have greatly lost that. We have absolutely lost that as a society. And I am this year 20 years teaching. 20 years. It struck me. My goodness. Where did the time go? 20 years. At ApocatastasisInstitute, these 12, 13 years, and then at another place, so it all adds up, and another place before that, for that matter. So 20 years before the mast, I will speak on very shortly. What are some of the things that I've learned? But at one point, I was very taken in by child-directed learning and self-directed learning. And there is a place for that. I will develop this point much more in another broadcast. But I also repent of that very much as well, because a lot of that rhetoric forgets that the child doesn't know what they don't know. I'm sorry to use an overused expression, you don't know what you don't know, but there are truths in these sayings. And a lot of the danger of child-directed learning is the fact that the child, and very often the parent, in these type of homeschool, unschool communities, they don't know their ass from their elbow. And yeah, they're setting out on the journey of learning, but that's like me setting out on the journey to New York State, which wouldn't be actually that hard. I would just have to go about 2 miles over the border in that direction there. So that's not the best example, but that's like setting out on the journey to Timbuktu. Yeah, I mean, I could set out on the journey and be really enthusiastic, but if I don't know which way is up, much less which way is north, how am I going to get there? And that is, getting back to discipline, that is probably something, especially in alternative education, we're going to have to correct for. Is basically a lot of us, I don't want to turn this into a pedagogy presentation, but a lot of us came out of very authoritarian schools where we were not told why things were that way, and not knowing that, went to the opposite end. And it's going to be child-directed learning, and they're just going to graze and pick up their passions as they go along. And then we now have generations, limited community, yes, but nevertheless generations of observation, and that creates equally as grave problems as the authoritarian, brainwashed, Rockefeller education student, the student that has no discipline or direction in their life, academically or professionally, much less personally. That creates all sorts of problems. Follow your heart. You can follow your heart off a cliff. You can follow your heart, if you're John Coleman, into a bottle of scotch all day if you're not careful. Following your heart is not always the best advice. It's actually probably more times than not horrible advice. And so, like everything else in life, the via media is necessary. But to Wells's point here, and to the point I'm trying to make, the education of an ordinary citizen, this outline, this project, expanded here at ApocatastasisInstitute, is comprehensible by an ordinary citizen, yes, but only if you and I apply ourselves diligently to this study. We have 13 weeks and 13 weeks and 13 weeks and 13 weeks. So 13 times 4, you come to find, is 52. There are 52 weeks in a year. This is the first season we're setting out. And you and I have a year ahead of us of distractions. We have a year of not showing up on Tuesday morning. We have a year of much sexier, and I don't mean that in an erotic sense, much sexier videos on YouTube about all sorts of worthy topics that have nothing to do with the systematic study of history. and we're going to need to discipline ourselves. Part of discipline in the academic life, and that's part of discipline in life, is, and maybe it's the most painful part, is having to mute or cut out things that are natively good. That's a really interesting aspect, that when in our diet, for instance, there's nothing wrong inherently with sugar or with alcohol or with fat, and yet we need to learn to restrict these things. It's quite, again, this gets back to the whole idea of discipline, to have to harness or buckle down on things that are altogether good. It's not that they're bad. I could do a whole presentation on that when it comes to addiction and things. Part of it is not to see whatever the vice is as bad, or the difficulty is that these things are often containing great amounts of good. And in our year of study ahead, there are so many worthy things that will butt into our time together, whether that's formally in class, full-time enrollment, monthly, whatever, or even these more distance presentations, which you might join us for. There are many, many worthy things, and yet we're going to have to discipline ourselves and not look at the cool YouTube presentation on politics or on philosophy or on whatever, because we have to stay on track. If you look at the old sagas, whether that's the Odyssey or the Aeneid or a whole slew of these similar presentations, there's a whole conga line you come to find in literature of these heroic stories that end in the letters Iad, I-A-D, Aeneid, Theabad, Henriad, Christiad, Dunciad, kind of a parody of dunce and dummy. I wrote one called the Donaldiad. But in these sagas and the hero's journey, you always have the hero, and there's always some bouncing vixen that's trying to seduce the hero. And I don't mean that even in the case of Odysseus with the mermaids who are going to kill him, but look at Dido in the Aeneid. But there's nothing wrong with Dido. She's a very likable character. There's nothing wrong at all. But Aeneas has to discipline himself and sail away, because his mission is of a greater good. That's the name of the game with discipline, whether that's academic discipline or pleasures of various sorts of addiction or potential addiction, or with a hero's journey. It's not that the thing that you're giving up is bad, but rather that you're after a greater good. You put aside relatively minor goods for the greater good. And that's done a lot for me academically and other ways to instill that discipline. It's not that you see the other thing as a bad, so much as you want to sublimate the energy of that good into a higher good. So in this instance, sticking with this very superficially boring study. And it will yield fruits down the line that you will not get for you and I to fritter away our hours on every piece of worthy clickbait. Anyhow. Okay, so he gets here. Again, I don't want to overdo the introduction because it's going to feature in some other aspects of ApocatastasisInstitute this week, including our Substack and our New Now post. I hope you follow us on Lorenzo's New Now website. Okay, I'm going to say a few words here about cave art, and then we're going to get into some other articles and things. But let me just check the tech, make sure you're sufficiently calm with the background music, as I trust you are. All right, so now editorial-wise, this whole version for year one of the outline of history, which I'm in the process of parceling out for the whole year, I've gotten the first 25% done. I've had to chop out different parts. And again, a lot of this project has been inspired by the Breviary or the Liturgy of the Hours or the Book of Common Prayer. It's the same concept. And so, the entire Bible is not covered in this. Even nowadays, we speak of the modern lectionary as covering the whole Bible. That's not the case at all. Maybe you get 70% of the Holy Bible over 3 years if you apply yourself to the Mass in the office, but you're not getting the whole Bible, much less are you getting the entire corpus of the Church Fathers. But you are getting a huge spread of it. And the purpose of this outline, or rather this project, is not to contain every single word of the outline of history. For instance, I do not see in future editions the benefit of including all of these people he's thanking, as worthy as they are, and as much as we are in a debt to these people we have no idea about. I don't see that this is necessarily the best use of the spaces and the minutes that we have to read. So in the future, this will be adjusted. And likewise, as we now move in, by Wednesday and Thursday of week 1, to the actual beginning of the historical treatment of the outline, I cut out a lot of the early scientific and almost spiritual ruminations of H.G. Wells. Not that they are not without value, although I think objectively, some of the natural science is not only a century out of date, but if Hilaire Belloc is to be believed, a century and a half out of date, because he was complaining in the 1920s that the presentation of Darwinianism was not up to date. But I, in future editions, will probably have more mythological origin stories in the beginning here. Not that I have particularly strong opinions about natural selection. What do they call it? Yes, natural selection is Darwinianism, or creation, or whatever. It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg, as Thomas Jefferson says. I don't know. Is it? I don't know if it's a thing with me or with I don't know. Maybe my brains have turned to mush, but I don't see these things as inherently in contradiction. A certain allowance for evolution and a divine creation of mankind. That's a very American thing, I think, to see an inherent collision between faith and reason. I don't really have that much to say about evolution. It's not my study. But nevertheless, future editions will feature probably more primal origin stories that will dovetail to this section that we read this week on Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal man. I only say all of that, not just to give you an insight into my editorial mind with this project, but also that you're not getting every single word. So if you're interested, he has some initial chapters about the formation of the Earth and the, weather. What do you call that weather? Not the environment, but the atmosphere. That's the word. The atmosphere. He famously has, I think it is included here a little bit later, has a very dramatic presentation of the flooding of the Mediterranean basin with water, which people at the time thought was quite artistic. Of course, Wells did a lot of fictional writing, so he does have that. He does have that aspect. The Neanderthal type of man prevailed in Europe at least for tens of thousands of years, for ages that make all history seem a thing of yesterday. These nearly human creatures prevailed. If the Heidelberg jaw was that of a Neanderthaler, and if there is no error in the estimate of the age of that jaw, then the Neanderthal race lasted for more than 200,000 years. Finally, between 40 and 25,000 years ago, as the fourth glacial age softened towards a more temperate condition, a different type of human come upon the scene. And it would seem exterminated Homo neanderthalensis This new type was probably developed in South Asia or North Africa, or in lands now submerged in that Mediterranean basin that he'll be describing soon enough. And as more remains are collected and evidence accumulates, men will learn more of their early stages. At present, we can only guess where and how, through the slow ages parallel with the Neanderthal cousin, these first true men arose out of some more ape-like progenitor. For hundreds of centuries, they were acquiring skill of hand and limb and power and bulk of brain in that still unknown environment. They were already far above the Neanderthal level of achievement and intelligence when they first come into our ken, and they had already split into two or more very distinctive races. And of course, these sorts of discussions invite all sorts of digressions. You can see the diversity of these selections. So you can go into the natural science aspect and see more recent um, discoveries and hypotheses, or you can go into the more philosophical or theological realms. I think about Pope Pius XII's Humani Generis and some of the counsel given there to the Western Christians. And then all sorts of origin stories. You could have a discussion on the Nephilim here, and as Wells lays out, and of course this is all speculative, but also psychopaths amongst us. Are they the Neanderthals? I mean, he lays out the possibility that Neanderthal bloodlines have continued and Cro-Magnon bloodlines have continued. I've heard that asserted as well, and I'm only saying this as theoretical here. But could it be that all the warmongers and attorneys and businessmen and people who have no compassion for humanity, I speak broadly, of course, how do you have this very distinctive strain of people who have no empathy whatsoever? And you get into looking at the brains of these so-called Neanderthals and Cro-Magnons, and the part of the brain that feels emotion in the skull size is constricted in these primitive peoples. And so, when you look at these consistent parasites in humanity, and more than parasites, monsters who start wars and benefit off misery. Some of them wear three-piece suits and fly around in helicopters and limousines nowadays. I mean, are these the bloodlines of the Neanderthals and the Cro-Magnons? And are those just other names for the Nephilim? You can have these aspects. Now, a lot of this, I'll be upfront, kind of digresses from strict just the facts, ma'am history, but that's the fun of it, isn't it? Okay, so always check the tech, because you have no idea how much aggravation comes about by jabbering on into the void when the thing kicks out. Okay, so I'm just going to go on a little bit about Cro-Magnon, and then we're going to get into some cave art from the Smithsonian website. So Cro-Magnon man. These newcomers did not migrate into Europe in the strict sense of the word, but rather as the century by century the climate ameliorated. They followed the food and plants to which they were accustomed. As those spread into the new realms that opened to them, the ice was receding, vegetation was increasing, big game of all sorts was becoming more abundant. Steppe-like conditions of pasture and shrub. When you hear steppe, that's what they're saying. Think the American Midwest or Central Europe, like Poland. I'm outside of our study here. I'm doing a massive amount of reading these months on the Second World War. And the Germans, when they go into the Soviet Union, encounter the steppe, and it's flat as far as the eye can see, and nothing. It was like driving through Mars. They said there was nothing to see for hundreds of miles. That's the steppe. They're bringing with them vast herds of wild horses. Ethnologists, students of race, and class these new human races in one and same species as ourselves, and with all human races subsequent to them under one common specific name of Homo sapiens, wise man, sapiencia. Right? And this is a good time to digress into what makes man different than the animals. And there's a few physical features that are worth mentioning, and there's a few spiritual features that are worth mentioning at this point. And physically, we have hips that allow us to walk bipedally. We are able to walk upright, much to the consternation and banged heads of many drunks and many boxers as well. It sometimes can be a burden, but we have the hips that allow us to stand up straight. We also have big toes, called hallux, if you want to be nerdy about it. The big toe, right, it allows us to stand up in this way. And also our thumbs, the analog, I suppose, on our hands of our big toes are our thumbs. And those allow a tremendous amount of versatility, right? You could actually get by relatively okay without fingers. These 8 guys, now you want it real nerdy and turn into a 12-year-old, right? You only have 8 fingers. You don't have 10 fingers. That is true, right? Because why? Because your thumb does not have 3 joints. Your fingers, right? 1, 2, 3. Your thumb only has 2 joints. Therefore, it's not a finger. So you only have, in fact, 8 fingers and 8 toes. Your big toes and your big thumbs and mine are not actually fingers or toes at all. But in any case, the thumbs, just like the big toe, the way it's in the foot allows the foot to operate in such a way with balance, and the hips allow us to balance upright in a way that the primates cannot. Primates can, even bears, they can stand up. Apparently dogs can, but it's very limited, and of course it's not natural, even to the primate. It's not natural to do that for any length of time. And the human being can. And the thumb, of course, allows us to do a tremendous amount. Likewise, you could lose your 4 fingers, 1, 2, 3, 4. You could lose them and still be able to do most of, you could manipulate your environment in much the same way. However, you could keep your 4 fingers and lose your thumb, and your ability to manipulate your environment would be greatly, and mine, greatly reduced. So physically, we have these qualities. Also, the human being is not uniquely, then it falls into a very small, I cannot think actually of any animals that reproduce facing each other. The animals either produce themselves and reproduce themselves through eggs, and various types of fertilization, but it's usually in the same direction, shall we say. The human being is different in that they mate facing each other. And when we get to ideas of philosophy and metaphysics and so forth, these will not be for nothing. Spiritually and mentally, we call ourselves Homo sapiens, wise men. Maybe we are flattering ourselves too much. But it is, without a doubt, the defining characteristic of man to have an appreciation and having a cogitation, is able to cogitate in a way the animals simply are not. So this is obvious. Even the smart animals, think of pigs, horses, whales, dolphins, octopi, ravens. They say the smartest animals of all, because they can think in sequences, are ravens and octopi. Right? What gives them, and elephants can do this too, and some primates, because they can use tools. The ability even in a very, they can think. They've done experiments on those 4 animals. Once again, ravens, octopi, elephants, and primates, which are a large group of species, where you can see that there is A, B, sometimes C thinking process going on, right? The primate knows that there are ants in that mound, and he knows his hand cannot go in that mound and successfully get the ants. But the primate knows, A, there are ants there. B, I get a stick. C, I can put it into the ant hole and eat the bugs, right? A, B, C. And elephants can do this in a very small way. Ravens can do this with tools. They can manipulate with sticks and things in order to crack open, whatever shell they need. And I saw an experiment once with an octopi who was, they did it in such a way the octopi had to think in steps. Primitive? Yes, very primitive. So even the smartest animals, even the primates, their ability to cogitate is nothing compared to a man. Even a retarded human being is smarter than a smart elephant or a smart primate. And to say nothing of your average human being, that is just part of the OS, part of our operating system, that we have an ability to reason. And then also, part of that ability to reason is a perception of time and of death. Those are 2 separate things. So the animal of whatever sort, and the insect, and the plant in the vegetable kingdom, they do not have a sense of time like we have a sense of time. They have instinct. They know when it's time to mate and when it's time to change the leaves, but they do not have a sense of time like us. And in fact, superficially, we might often think that an animal is cogitating when it's just instinct. The example, sorry to burst your bubble, the example is when you wake up in the morning and your dog's licking your hand. Oh, look, Fido is wishing me good morning. He loves me. Fido loves me. Well, it is true that animals can have a bestial affection. That's for certain. But Fido is not licking your hand because he wants to give you a cute morning wake-up routine. Fido's licking your hand because there's salt on your hand and maybe Doritos, right? Or my cat, is on my stomach when I wake up in the morning. How cute! He's wishing me good morning. No, your cat is checking out to see if you're alive or not. And as the book says, when you die, he'll eat your eyes first. That's a book, by the way, by an undertaker in America. Will my cat eat my eyes? In any case, yes, a lot of the so-called intelligent things animals do is bestial affection, which is not cogitating itself, or it's instinct. And then there is some limited cogitating abilities of animals, but those fall far short of your average retarded human, much less a person of their faculties. Okay, all of that leads, yes, into the appreciation of time. So animals and plants do not operate in time with a conception of time before, during, and after. And then also, into the future, the perception of death. The animal does not ordinarily think about this. Maybe in some extreme circumstances, mammals can do this. So, for instance, you can have 5 alligators, and you can stomp the heads in of 4 of those alligators. Gotta check my math. You can stomp in the heads of 4 out of 5 alligators who are lined up in a row. And the 5th alligator could care less. The alligator is a sneeze away from being a plant. Reptiles are classed between mammals and plants for a reason. Birds are considered cold-blooded, and we say bird brain, right? I mean, you could chop off a chicken's head next to another chicken, and he wouldn't really care that much. With a mammal, it's different. And there are all sorts of tricks that farmers have in the slaughter pens to make sure that you know, uh, you know, horse, Mr. Ed doesn't know that Mrs. Ed has just been executed for glue, and Mr. Ed is next. Or pigs. They do say that pigs are smart, and that in the time of execution, and cows, in that moment where they're being lined up, that they do have a certain consciousness that their end is near, and that they'll start panicking. In fact, there was a retarded woman called Temple Grandin. They call it now autism. She had some sort of autism, and she invented a slaughter pen, darling that she was, so that the cows would not realize that they were being led to slaughter, and would release all sorts of hormones like adrenaline, and damage the meat. And I've heard that from some kind of hippy dippy smart people, that they've been able to taste the adrenaline. That makes sense, right? Adrenaline's a chemical, so if the animal is panicked, you should be able to, I guess, taste it if you know what you're out for. Or adrenochrome, in another conversation altogether, is a chemical, so therefore can be quantified. Anyway, so yeah, in extreme circumstances like a slaughter pen, apparently some of them, the more complicated mammals can appreciate death, but they can't really appreciate death in the existential sense that a human can, right? If a cow is going to panic because they're in a funnel slaughter pen, as opposed to one of Temple Grandin's, what do you say, amusement park cues, because she figured out if you prior to her, like the cows were like kind of all like funneled into this triangle thing, and then they were killed, and they could all see the other cows being killed, and they could put two and two together. But she figured out, like, like Disney World, where you have like a line that goes back and forth, that if you could just do that and like make the walls really high, the cows wouldn't know until they got to the end of the maze where they were destined for, and therefore they wouldn't panic, and therefore they wouldn't put adrenaline into their muscles. So, yeah, I mean, if an animal is going to panic in the sense that they know death is coming, it's not because they're having existential panic like a human being would. This is, again, all of this is part of the discussion of what makes man different than the animals. It's rather that there is some physical trial coming for the animal. The human being has this existential aspect to their reality. They know that, speaking of time, before, during, and after, there was a time when they were not, and now there is a time that they are, and that there will be a time when they are not once again, at least physically speaking. That will, of course, lead to all discussions of afterlives and religious mythologies and so forth in future weeks. But that was a good opportunity here to lay out the differences between men and animals. Many similarities, but many differences, especially in the physical as well as in the intellectual and spiritual, you might even say. Okay, at this point, I want to switch gears and just check that beautiful background music. Okay, and now we're going to get into our final stretch, and we're going to look at Paleolithic art, which H.G. Wells gets into in this week's selection. So I encourage you down below in the description to download our volume 1 and to read along with us. The readings are apportioned over 13 weeks for this autumn. So why don't you download it and join us every Tuesday at this hour? Okay, so this is Smart History. Smart, you notice the art history, the Center for Public Art History. Okay, so this isn't the Smithsonian, excuse me. This is Smart History, the Center for Public Art History. Okay, this is called the Paleolithic Art, an introduction by Dr. Bethany Harris and Dr. Stephen Zucker. And we're looking, here's another, this is cave art. And here I think this is probably a reproduction of cave art, but we're focusing on this Paleolithic period. Okay, the oldest art is ornamentation. Humans, Homo sapiens, once again, make art. We do this for many reasons, and with whatever technologies are available to us. Research suggests that Neanderthals also made art. Extremely old, non-representational ornamentation has been found across Africa. The oldest firmly dated example is a collection of an 82,000-year-old Nassarius snail shell found in Morocco that are pierced and covered with red ochre. Wear patterns suggest that they may have been strung beads. Nassarius shell beads found in Israel may be more than 100,000 years old, and in the Blombos cave in South Africa, pierced shells and small pieces of ochre etched with simple geometric patterns have been found in a 75,000-year-old layer of sediment. Here we have a woman, type of statuette. You just love me for my body. Okay. So you can see the fertility, right? The breasts there and the uh, vulva, right? And you see that a lot. You see that a lot with these caveman art, right? The obviously fertility aspects of the woman's body that are being focused on. So the oldest representational art. Some of the oldest known of such imagery comes from the Aurignacian culture in the Upper Paleolithic period. Archaeological discoveries across a broad swath of Europe include over 200 caves with spectacular paintings, drawings, and sculpture that are among the earliest undisputed examples of representational image making. Among these is a 2.4-inch tall female figure carved out of mammoth ivory. So we see something about the animals that were roaming the earth with these cavemen. There were mammoths. That was found in 6 fragments in the Hohlfels cave in southern Germany, allegedly dating back to 35,000 BCE. And here we see the happy lady here. This is what they're referring to. Let's take a look at the bottom. Yeah, this is exactly what they're talking about. So this is from Germany. Okay, so that's representational art. Here's more famous cave paintings as well. And this is the left wall from Lascaux to the Hall of Bulls, a replica of the original cave. Replica. It's closed to the public. Wait, is the replica closed to the public? Wow, talk about simulacra. So this here is Lascaux. This is, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. Okay, so this is a replica of the cave, but the replica is off limits to the public. I can't imagine the actual cave is open to the public. So why would you make a replica of the original? Okay, well, maybe we'll find out here. This is a warty pig. It's called a warty pig, a warthog. Here, hold on. The caves at the Chauvet Pont d'Arc in Lascaux, Pechmerle and Altamira contain the best known examples of prehistoric paintings and drawing. Here are remarkably evocative renderings of animals and some humans that employ a complex mixture of naturalism and abstraction. Archaeologists that study the Paleolithic era humans believe that the paintings discovered in 1994 are more than 30,000 years old. The images found at Lascaux and Altamira are more recent, dating from approximately 15,000 BCE. Paintings at the Pechmerle date from 25 to 15,000. So you're dealing with huge time periods. They don't really know how far back it goes, but my goodness, the mists of time. The world's oldest known cave painting, found in Indonesia in 2017, was made at least 45,500 years ago. What can we really know about the creators of these paintings and what the images originally meant? These are questions that are difficult enough when we study art made only 500 years ago. It is much more perilous to assert meaning for the art of people who shared our anatomy but had not yet developed the cultures or linguistic structures that shape whom we have become. To the tools of art history even apply? Here is evidence of a visual language that collapses the more than 1,000 generations that separate us. We must be cautious. This is especially so if we want to understand the people that made this art as a way to understand ourselves. It's one of the reasons for art, isn't it? The desire to speculate based on what we see and the physical evidence of the caves is wildly seductive. Once again, there's a replica of these caves that apparently we're not allowed to go to. So again, why would you make a replica? See, now I'm going to get off the history thing. This is how you end up with people who are extremely skeptical about the historical record and about the profession of history, because you have these points. I'm going to find out. I'm going to see if there's anything published. Why would you make replicas and not allow? I can get why you would not allow the originals of these ancient things to be seen, right? I mean, if you have tourists piling in and out of here all day with cameras and sweat and all of this jazz, I can get why you'd want to keep the caves off limits, although that's going to fuel speculation as to one's honesty in our present climate. Fair enough. But why would you keep the replicas off limits? I must find out. We'll find out. We'll lead with that next week. But alas, our time together is at an end, because I must boogie to another class, IRL class, let's say. Latin. I'm doing these presentations on Tuesday, and we have Latin here at ApocatastasisInstitute on Tuesday, and probably Greek as well soon enough. And so I have to head over there. But before we are done, again, you can freely download all of our project material, including this text from H.G. Wells, down below in the description here on BitChute, Rumble, YouTube 1, 2, and 3. And if you come across this on our social media, you can find our site and just click it and like and subscribe. We have all of these presences on Substack, Gab, Telegram, Facebook, BitChute, Rumble, Indeed, LinkedIn, YouTube, Discord, Telegram, also to be listed here in the future, Nextdoor.com, Bluesky.com, Twitter.com. I will not call it its rebrand name. So all of that has to be added. But hey, there's plenty to keep you occupied on our social media already. So there you go. Our first week of this fall setting out, this fall semester. And what a great time we have had. So thank you for watching and hanging out. And next week, we're going to carry on with H.G. Wells, and I will see you then. So take care and see you in class.